Hey guys, it's Sheri Vegas and welcome back to my channel. So today we're talking about all things to do with bubbles and resin. So how to reduce them, how to get rid of them, and how to work with them when you are working with different types of resin, because there are quite a lot of different types. So here are my top tips and tricks for bubbles in resin. So one of the most important things when you are working with resin is the temperature of the room. You want it around 24 degrees. If it is too hot or too cold, it can affect your resin and how it will mix together and combine and how it will work when you are working with it. And it will affect bubbles. So if the room is super hot, your resin's going to start to set faster, but it will actually reduce the bubbles in your resin. If your room's really cold, like say you are in a colder climate, it's snowing outside, and your temperature of your room is quite cold and it's not sitting at that 24 degrees, you're going to have issues because your resin's going to be a lot thicker. It's not going to move as freer, so you're going to have to mix it harder, which will entail you then adding bubbles into your resin. So that is one of my top tips, is you have to have your room temperature at the correct 24 degrees for your resin. I mostly work with Barnes and Art resin and Just resin, and they like to sit around the 24 degrees for an epoxy resin. So definitely you've got to make sure you've got the right working conditions before you start. My second tip is, if you are working in a cold climate or a hot climate, how do you combat this? And you might not have aircon, or you might not have heating, or your heating might not work well enough. So you can do what's called a resin bath, where you stick your jugs of resin into a warm bath to heat it up if you are in a cold climate to get it to that 24 degrees, or you can do an ice bath if you are working in a really hot environment. So I live in Queensland and it can be so hot here that a lot of the time, and my studio does not have air conditioning, and it will be 30 to 40 degrees here. So a cold bath does help with my resin and getting it to the right temperature to make it easier to work with, and that way I'm not whipping bubbles into my resin. My third tip is add heat. So as I said before, if you are working with a hot day, you'll find that you get a lot less bubbles in your resin, but also too, that will then, if you are trying to do it when it's hot to reduce bubbles, you're going to have issues with it setting faster. So you want to make sure you do still stay around that 24 degrees, but by adding heat, once you've done your pour, that means that you've already worked with it. You're not cutting down your working time, but you're getting rid of the bubbles. And there's two techniques that I like to use for this. The first one is just using a blowtorch. A blowtorch is great, and it's got some pros and cons. The pro is that it doesn't move your resin and it will just heat up the spots, and because it's quite hot and quite targeted, you're just going to pop the bubbles, all the little micro bubbles that you've whipped in, you're just going to pop it up. The con is that it only can go down about 1 centimeter into your resin, so if you're doing a big beautiful artwork or a chopping board, it's completely fine, it will work. But if you're doing something like casting with resin, it's not going to be able to get down deep enough if you are casting over more than 1 centimeter. So that is a con with working with a blowtorch. Another con is that it's also working with fire, and you are adding it to a chemical, so you do have the extra safety requirements when you do work with a blowtorch. A second way that you can use heat to get rid of your bubbles is with a heat gun. And the same as before, it will have some pros and cons with it. Your heat gun is great because it isn't an open flame. It is a lot safer to work with. A few cons is it's got to be plugged into electricity. So when I do my art workshops, I can't bring a heat gun because there's no power points close enough, and it would be very hard when 15 people are trying to remove cords around. So the blowtorch is a lot more effective in my workshops. But one of the pluses with working with a heat gun is that it's not fire. You're not working with open flame, so you don't have those safety issues. It's not going to burn any of it, so if you are putting flowers or something into your work, you know, it's not going to burn those flowers. The second pro is it can actually make really cool patterns in your art. So if you've done a pretty artwork and you want to blow it, like if you've ever seen the beach scene artwork where they do the white and they use the heat gun to blow it and to spread and separate the resin, you can get some really cool effects with that. But that can also be a con if you're very happy with how it's looking. You don't necessarily want to use a heat gun because it might blow everything differently and wreck your beautiful artwork that you have created. So I always have both on hand, and I use them for different things when I am doing artworks. And they both have their purpose and their place, and they are really great at getting rid of bubbles if you are only going 1 centimeter down. So I've still got some more tips to come, so keep watching. But if you're liking this video, please do subscribe, as it really does help my channel out, and give me a big thumbs up so I know to create more content like this for you. And if you have any videos you want me to create or any information, questions, I'm more than happy to answer. Please leave it in the comment box below. I always love chatting to everyone on Facebook and YouTube and my Instagram, so don't forget to follow me on all my other social medias. So let's get to the next tip. So my next tip is, it's all about how you mix your resins together. If you mix really slowly and take your time, patience is key, you're not going to be whipping bubbles into your resin. But if you mix really vigorously, you're going to be whipping bubbles into your resin. Now, in my workshops, I tell people I prefer them to overmix than undermix, because I want to make sure that A and B are combined, because it is the first time that they're using resin. And because we are doing an artwork, I can then get the bubbles out with a blowtorch. But it is always best to take your time when mixing resin. Stick to that 3-minute mark that nearly every resin manufacturer has, and mix slowly. That way you're not going to be whipping bubbles into your resin, and therefore you're not going to have to get those bubbles out at a later point when you are doing your artwork. Another great tip is pick the right resin for the right job. A lot of the time I see people using the wrong resins, trying to do different things, and then having issues with bubbles. So epoxy based resins just for art do tend to get quite bubbly when you do mix them. That's just how they are, that's how they're designed. If you are doing casting, I do definitely recommend switching from your general art epoxy resin to an epoxy casting resin. It's generally a 2-to-1 ratio depending on what brand, but they have a lot less bubbles in them because of that 2-to-1 ratio. So definitely consider the brand you're using and what you're using it for when picking your resin, because it can affect it greatly how much bubbles you do get in. And if you pick the right resin, you might not get any bubbles and not need to use any of those other tips. Okay, my last tip for you guys, and I hope you enjoy this. Please don't forget to give this video a big thumbs up, and I hope you enjoyed this so far. This is a bit of a pro tip, is pressure pots and vacuum pots. This is what some pro artists do use. They are expensive, so this is for someone who is a proper artist. Or, hey, if you've got the money, go ahead and get one. They're absolutely amazing. Pressure pots and vacuum pots. Vacuum pots suck all the air bubbles out, and pressure pots pressurize what's inside the pot so much that they make the bubbles go microscopic. So these are both great tools to use. There are a few downsides, is you have to, 1, buy them, they're very expensive. 2, they're generally not that big, so they will only work, generally they're around this size, and obviously the bigger you get, the more expensive they get. They are up into the hundreds, into the thousands for these pots. You do have to have a power source, and you do need to have a pressurized pump system to work them. So you will see professional wood carvers that use resin, they will always have them, but you can't fit much in them. So you wouldn't be able to fit an artwork or anything quite large. It's generally more for paperweights or smaller bowls, but they are amazing with getting bubbles out, because they'll either pressurize them so tiny that you don't even see them, or they'll completely suck them out depending on which type of pressurized system you use. So thank you guys so much for watching this. I hope you enjoyed this. Please give this video a big thumbs up, and if you have any other video ideas for me to do, or you just want me to test out, please leave a comment below. I'm always happy to do any videos you guys would suggest, especially in the resin art spectrum, as well as any other art form or DIY project. Thank you guys so much for watching.